speech that he gave at the as the Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecturer, which I haven't listened to yet, but it's apparently on the archives that you can listen to online from the Buckminster Fuller Institute or archives. At any rate, what was the connection between Fuller, and what was the influence that Korzybski had on him? I would say that Fuller sort of probably got a little boost from reading whatever he read of Korzybski's work, but he was basically working in that direction already. What Korzybski called it the non-Aristotelian revision of Western culture, I would say human culture. Fuller was a worker in that direction already before he met Korzybski. So Korzybski may have influenced him a little bit, but it wasn't. They were walking along a similar path, so to speak. Now, Albert Ellis may have had gotten a little bit more from Korzybski. You know, he was struggling around in the early 1950s. He had trained. He was a PhD psychologist who had trained in psychoanalysis, and was getting increasingly frustrated with the ineffectiveness of what he was doing. You know, I think initially he had people doing free association while lying on the couch the way presumably orthodox psychoanalysts were supposed to do, and it just wasn't working for him. You know, he was trying to measure as well as he could whether the people who came to see him to get help for their neuroses and other things, you know, he wanted to see that he was having a discernible, measurable difference somehow, observable difference, and he wasn't able to be satisfied with what was happening. So he had been looking at various things, and there were many, many workers in psychology and psychiatry who were moving in the direction of which is now called cognitive behavioral therapy. You know, basically looking at how people, quote unquote, think and feel about things, and our ability to the extent that we have the ability to, in a sense, step back from ourselves and look at what we're saying to ourselves, that maybe we can say some things to ourselves that will lead to better results. So, you know, there were a number of people who were working in that direction, and Korzybski had a very explicit message in that regard. So, again, I think he gave Albert Ellis quite a boost, probably more than the kind of boost that Buckminster Fuller had. So I think there was a little bit more influence, but Ellis was moving in that direction already. You know, Korzybski didn't invent the new worldview that seems to be emerging. But I think from my point of view, and I confess to if somebody wants to call me a Korzybskian, that's perfectly all right. I accept the designation. From my point of view, nobody put together the basic framework for talking about that development of human thinking better than Korzybski. Basically, one of the ways I have of describing it is that he, if you use a computer analogy with operating systems, basically what he was saying was that the operating system that we've been using for a couple thousand years is seriously out of date, and we need to upgrade it. And here's my attempt at an upgrade. And that's what he was doing, basically. And
okay, let me just stop you there. I want to follow up on something you said, and then you can go back to saying whatever you want.
Is this going okay?
Yeah.
Okay,
so
fine.
About a minute ago you said that Korzybski had a major influence on the new world view that is developing, the new way that people are looking at the world. What new worldview is that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. Well, first of all, I don't want to give the impression that I think he had a major influence on developing that. I think what he attempted to do was to summarize thought currents, so to speak, that were happening in world culture, and to summarize them and put them in some kind of systematic form and extract something teachable out of that, so that the trend that he was observing could be accelerated. That was what he was doing. He didn't invent the development per se. It's something that seems to have emerged out of the present stage of human culture and development. So your question is, what is that?
Yeah, what is that?
What does that consist of?
Yeah, what's this new worldview that is developing?
Well, my first reply to that would be, oy vey, have I got a job explaining that? Korzybski called it the non-Aristotelian, or a non-Aristotelian revision. And I don't know if that may have also led to some confusion, because and then people ended up thinking that he was totally against Aristotelian, what's called Aristotelian logic, and that he completely rejects Aristotle and all that. So it may be better to not talk about it in terms of non-Aristotelian so much as what I've called in other places a relational viewpoint. In other words, to begin the way that Korzybski and others have analyzed this is that when Aristotle was doing his thing over 2,000 years ago, it was 2,300 years ago approximately, that Aristotle was working, and he was collecting all kinds of data about, animals. He had people collecting seashells for him and animal biological samples. If you read Aristotle's Politics, he was collecting constitutions from various forms of government to try to, what was he trying to do with all this collecting? And he was basically attempting to not only, he was kind of like an encyclopedist of the time, and it was incredible what he did. And the stuff that he did in relation to what they call logic and so forth had to do with extracting what he saw as the methodology for gaining knowledge about the world. And what was part of that methodology that Aristotle developed was he didn't have modern science. He didn't have medicine. I don't even think that Aristotle knew that the brain constitutes the central node of the nervous system. I think he talked about the heart as being the center of consciousness. And they've done studies now that the whole organism is basically enwrapped and permeated with nervous system fibers. So you could say that probably the nervous system is all over us, not just in the brain. But nonetheless, Aristotle knew very little about that. That he didn't, even though there was a quite vital science of astronomy, they didn't. Apparently, there wasn't a great deal of clarity about, where the Earth stood in relation to the rest of the universe. Aristotle's system that was kind of systematized by Ptolemy later on, the astronomer in Alexandria. Ptolemy put the Earth in the center of the universe. So this was the state of knowledge at the time. And basically, since Aristotle didn't have microscopes, he didn't have CT scans, he didn't have telescopes, he did the best he could. And basically what his logic, if you think of Aristotle's logic as a kind of as implying certain things about the metaphysics or the basic structure of the world, basically he was developing his system from a macroscopic, what I see, what I feel and touch is the way things actually are. He didn't know anything about electrons or protons or quarks. So the metaphysics of Aristotle, if you read Aristotle, he was interested in finding the essence